Welcome to Champagne Problems Podcast. I am your host, Robbie Shaw. Join us as we explore mental and emotional well-being, physical optimization, and the journey to discovering your highest self. Champagne Problems is brought to you in proud partnership with Bond Buzz, the alcohol-free social spirit. Matt Dawson, welcome to Champagne Problems.
I appreciate you having me on. I've been looking forward to this.
Absolutely. I have too. I often open up with how I know my guest, and we do not know each other, which is more exciting for me because often I kind of inevitably will have some level of agenda if I know the person, or it'll influence how and what I ask. But I don't know you. I've read quite a bit about you, and there's a lot to dig in on. It's interesting. Like I was riding over here thinking about how to intro this conversation, and just as a man who does like some stuff, it's like you want to relate. I don't know if I can relate. It's like, yeah, dude, I've done a triathlon. I take some ice baths. It's like, man, there's only a few people around that have done some of the things that you've done. You're in an elite group. It's
interesting you said, we talked just before we started here about Laird Hamilton, and about all the stuff that he's done. And, the way I look at it, it's there are things that people do, but it's really kind of what's the reason behind it. What's driving that kind of thing. So I think a lot of times, we can't necessarily, or sometimes we can't necessarily relate on the particular expeditions or activities, but we can relate on the purpose and the drivers behind them.
Of course.
And I think that's a real point of commonality that some people fail to understand, when you start talking about like bigger things. Yeah. Like Laird surfing these things. Mm-hmm. Like I could never, I've surfed twice in my life. And
right.
That shows you how much I enjoyed
waiver,
it.
Exactly.
That I surfed twice shows you exactly how much I enjoyed it.
Right.
But it's just interesting that and that's what we try to do, talking about the things that I've had a chance to do is getting people to relate to it on that different level. Yeah. And this are all these commonalities that we have. And it's just, that's the interesting thing. It's really to me behind all this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, that makes perfect sense. So there's, even on the lower level of things that I have kind of pushed myself, to certain limits, and then people see it or hear about it and they're like, oh man, I could never do that. And I'm like, yes, you can. Yeah. And I imagine even the things you do, while, they are super extreme and there's a huge risk factor, but once you kind of get into that space, it just becomes who you are and what you do. And you can put your mind to anything, right?
It is. And that's the thing is that's one thing we try to get people to understand, through the organization and then personally the things that I talk about is we're all capable of so much more. Right. And I don't mean that in the, Hallmark greeting card, preachy way that you see on every bumper sticker or whatever, but it's just we all have so much more inside of us. Yeah. And we really just start to just kind of scratch the surface. And even all these things that I've had the opportunity to do, whether it's Everest or rowing the Atlantic or crossing the Mojave a couple times, is whenever I get done, the first thing I normally think is I don't want to do that again. And then a couple days later, I'm like, I think I can do it faster or bigger or more or whatever, because you think you understand where your limits are, and then every time I get there, I'm like, okay, my limit's going to be right here, and I get there, I'm like, it's not there. Yeah. And then I look, I'm like, well, maybe it's over there, and I get over there, and I'm like, it's not there. And it's just, we have these perceptions of our limits, whether they be psychological, physical, emotional, that if we keep trying to push up against them, we'll realize more times than not, they're not where we think they are. Mm-hmm. And that we all have so much more inside of us.
Well, that is so where we're probably going to go in this conversation. I was talking to someone earlier today about pushing limits, and I was telling her about this, Laird and Gabby do an thing called XPT, and it's essentially
I've got it on my phone.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, it's awesome. Yeah. And they do their experiences, in Malibu and Kauai and Costa Rica. And I did one in Malibu last year, and there was a point where you're underwater and you're holding your breath to a point where your brain and body
running the weights and doing the different
things.
things.
You're doing underwater workouts, but that requires obviously a level of breath holding and mind control in order to hold your breath longer periods of time while you're exerting energy and oxygen and all that. But there's a test, and they meet you where you are, but it's how many times can you go back and forth underwater, and of course you can go until you feel like you're going to die. And then, you got Gabby staring at you at 6'3" 3/4" with those piercing eyes saying you can do more. Yeah. And you do, and you push more. And so I answered a question earlier today with a guest, and she said, what was it about that experience that was life-changing? That was something I told her. And it was that pushing through. It was that point where I think I'm going to either pass out or die. And then I remember her telling me, you're not gonna.
Right.
So see what it's like to push through that and then doing it. And man, there's a reward on the other end of that.
There is, and it's interesting that you mentioned that because I do a lot of that with breath work. So every morning as I do, I'll spend anywhere from 10 minutes to 30 minutes meditating, and it's literally one of the first things I do before I get on, start answering emails or have any external stimuli or something like that. It gives me a chance to sit quietly with myself, kind of calm the things down, see how I'm feeling, get my mind set on the day and set some intentions and things like that. But I'll use various techniques. One of them is a series of breath hold, or like holotropic breathing and things like that. And there have been times when I'm sitting there on my living room floor, doing breath holds, and in my mind I'm like, I'm about to die. Like I'm freaking out.
Somebody's gonna find me.
Yeah, I'm like, this is it. But then when you realize it is it's all your body. Your body is trying to tell you to be aware of something.
Right.
And then once it's just like you said, is once you can kind of push through that, is you kind of get to the other side and you calm back down. And I've found sometimes it's been another minute that I've been able to hold on outside of that when I'm like, I'm like writing my will in my mind.
Is it. Yeah.
But I've got another minute 30 inside, whatever it is. But it's just, there are those lines that we can certainly get past. But I think the important thing also to incorporate in this conversation is it's not just physical limits. When we're talking about this stuff, it's not just going out and running a marathon or climbing a mountain or squatting 400 pounds or whatever it is. It's these emotional, psychological limits where it's, showing up for your family every single day. It's working 2 jobs. It's being there for your kids. It's being there for your loved ones, being there, all these different things. Yeah. Those really are kind of the bigger things that I think get lost a lot of times. When we talk about, pushing limits and dedication and perseverance, this day-to-day stuff.
Yeah. So you're equating, those kinds of pushes, those kinds of limit pushing and challenges and intentional suffering to train the mind and body for executing
exactly.
In
or
the
you
real
can
world.
I think it works that way, but you can also exemplify these things through those daily activities. Because look, I train on average, 21 hours a week, 3 hours every single day. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's a little bit less. And I can tell you, I don't want to get up every single morning and do that. Half the time I'd probably rather be doing something else because I'm hurting all the time and, you get bored with it and like all these things. But it's the same thing as if, you're working 40, 50, 60 hours a week, is getting up out of bed every morning and still putting that work in.
Yeah.
And then being there for your family, being there for your kids to show them attention when you get home when you're tired.
Right.
And being there for your friends. And then also making your life about more than yourself, being there for your community, being there for others when you don't necessarily feel like doing it.
Yeah.
It's all these things are, kind of, they all work together.
Yeah.
So it's I think important not to lose that in the context of talking about, perseverance and pushing limits and things like that.
And that's kind of what I was referring to, because in my mind, maybe I didn't say it right, but in my mind, I have a 14-year-old daughter, and I know what's right. I know all the things I'm supposed to know as a parent, and then the execution part is the hard part. Yeah. Like you said, there's days that you're just not feeling it, man. I don't want to listen. I don't want to active listen. I don't want to respond. I don't want to do anything. Yeah. But if I don't push through that, resistance, then I'm kind of a piece of shit, right? And meanwhile, I can go feel like I'm on the verge of death and push through that.
Right.
Can't I sit with my 14-year-old for 15 minutes and listen about her tough day?
Yeah, I think you said that very well. And the challenge is we are what we try it again. We are what we repeatedly do. And it's like when you choose to back down in these little moments, they all start adding up after a while. And that's what we have to be careful of. Is if you show up, here, but you don't show up here, then you don't show up, then you don't show up, then you don't show up. Yeah. It builds up very, very quickly. And to your example about that is I was having a conversation with a very good friend about 2 days ago, and it was just we weren't getting along very well. And and the old me would have just kind of sat there in that anger and like, no, I'm going to be mad because I want to be mad, and I'm going to make this person mad. I'm just going to I'm going to burn this whole house down. That kind of thing. I'm like, it's all going up. But then I just sat there. I'm like, just breathe. And I was like, what do I value here? And I was like, I love this person dearly. I've sacrificed for them. They've sacrificed for me. And I know they're hurting right now and I'm hurting right now. So what's more important to me? Sitting with my anger or showing up for myself and showing up for them and kind of getting through this.
Pushing through.
Exactly. And it's the exact same thing. That or running a marathon, a tri, rowing the ocean. A lot of these things are very, very similar.
God, man, great point. Great point. You know, I'm married and went through a rough patch, and a lot of that was exactly what you just described. It was just ego and refusal to surrender.
Yeah.
Right. And we'll get into that, but I mean that's it. It's like I wouldn't surrender the whatever I needed to kind of hold up here,
right,
in order to just get to where I inevitably want to be anyway.
Yeah.
You know, I want to be with her, and I want to be in sync with her, yet I won't back down.
It's and look, I've failed in those situations more times than I can count, and I'm sure I'm going to in the future, but it's not going to be intentional. But it's just I ask myself, like, what do I value more in this moment? Holding on to my anger, or getting past that and connecting with the person that I care about and getting to a good place and helping them feel better and me feeling better. And it was so hard to put that match down or put that weapon down, and then to open up and to be vulnerable. But a few minutes later, we ended up having talked through it, had a great day, and we've had great days ever since. And it's been a turning point.
Well, it's very, and we'll move on in a second, but it's very similar to the way I was describing pushing through that moment of, call it panic, but almost ultimate suffering, and then there being a reward on the other end and some relief, and everything kind of goes here. I often provide the example of my wife and I, but since we had a separation and got back together, now we have been working on things, and those moments of resentment, those moments of anger, where we could just let it fester and simmer and go our separate ways, and it could be days and days and days. Now we handle it right away.
Right.
We fix it quickly. We both surrender very, very quickly, and then the reward is almost instantaneous. Yeah. Everything just goes
And the more you do it, it's like putting in miles.
Yeah.
It's the more you do it, the easier it gets. And that's not to say it's ever going to be easy, but it gets easier, in each of these situations. And you can just learn from learn something you can take away from it and apply it to the next time. And you just start kind of knocking these things out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's good to hear, though, man.
Yeah, we're happier than we've ever been. So let's go into, like you kind of prefaced with some of the why. Mm-hmm. Now, some of my listeners, maybe a lot of my listeners, might not be familiar with who you are and some of the things you've done, some of the feats you've accomplished. And we can run through those, but I'd love to kind of go before that and into some of your journey that led you to these intense, massive, crazy fucking adventures.
It's funny how all this stuff ties together, and it ties back to the conversation that we were just having. Is what led me into all this was being lost, is being in pain. Literally for decades. And I think a lot of people, more and more today, unfortunately, can relate to that. Just as I suffered from, I don't even like to say suffered, as I experienced or dealt with, I think what you'd call probably high functioning depression, literally for decades. I mean, for as early as I can remember, there was something just a little askew, kind of most times. And I hit it. Is when I was growing up, I became very good at being a chameleon. And I could be whatever I needed to be in whatever situation and perform to whatever level. And what you saw on the outside versus what was going on the inside were normally two very different things. And I didn't let anybody in. But the challenge is when you start to do that, you kind of create these walls, but you're unknowingly creating your own cell, your own cave, for lack of a better term. Is that, and then, once I hit like my late 30s, it's, I was so disconnected from everyone, I didn't know how to reconnect with them. I didn't know how to love. I didn't know how to receive love. I didn't know how to feel joy or contentment or pride or anything like that. All I felt was just anger and confusion and frustration and disconnected. And it just had this thing inside me. It's like something's wrong with me. And there were multiple times throughout my youth and up until my late 30s, as I was on the verge of suicide. I was very, very close. A handful of times. And if my family wasn't around, I probably would have gone through with it, because you get to that point. You're like, I want this to end. I want to be out of this pain, and you don't share it with anybody. Then you get stuck in your head. You can't get down into your heart. You can't get down into your body. Like we're supposed to flow freely between the head and the heart, and you just get stuck in this kind of, this circle stuck in your head, and it's just a dark, dark place. And I wish I had a better story kind of leading into things, but that's honestly, that's what led me to kind of doing all this stuff. Where in my, when I was about 30, I think I was 38, is I was in that place, and my mother died, and then I broke up with a serious girlfriend, and that was really the first girl I ever saw maybe having something, something long-term with. And I looked at my life, I was like, I'm effing miserable. Mm-hmm. And, if you look at my bank account, I was doing really well. I was living in the Hollywood Hills, and I could, buy cars and motorcycles and take trips and this and that. But inside, I was just in a bad, bad place, and then it just got to that point of, look, I was like, I'm either going in or I'm going out. Like, yeah. I'd had enough. So I traveled to Nepal, spent 3 weeks hiking around the Mount Everest region. And it was on that trip, and we can get into it, if you'd like to, but I experienced this breakdown and breakthrough. Where I'm on the ground just bawling. Uncontrollably like a baby in the dirt, and there's spit and snot. I'm 40 pounds heavier than I am now. I got a beard, down to here. And, this big kind of breakdown happened. And then maybe it lasted about 10, 15 minutes. And then I walked into a little tea house to have breakfast, and I had another breakdown. And then after that, I was finally able to collect myself as I looked up, and something spoke to me. And you can call it God or the universe or, the collective unconscious, whatever it is to anybody. And it said two things. It said, you're not living with a sense of purpose, and your life is only about you. And I have goosebumps here. I knew in that moment that my life had changed forever. And I finally understood the power and the magnitude of every single second, where our lives can change for better or for worse in every single second. And I understood for the first time the purpose of my life. And the purpose of my life is to help other people discover their purpose and to avoid this pain and confusion and frustration that I faced for so many years. Because I know what it is to be alone in that darkness, and to not be seen and not be understood, and to be just completely disconnected, and not being able to communicate that effectively to get the help you're looking for, and to feel broken. And it's a horrible, horrible place to be. And so now, when I got out of that, a couple years later, started Dawson Peak Foundation and started doing all these things. That was really, that was really the kind of the backstory of starting everything. And that's the purpose of me going out and climbing the mountains and rowing the oceans and all this kind of stuff, is just to show people that we are capable of change, we are capable of growth, and we all have so much more capacity and capability than we give ourselves credit for. So I understand that. I'm sorry, that's a long-winded answer.
Fantastic.
But that's really kind of what started all this stuff.
Yes. Man, thank you for sharing that. That's so powerful. I think, just like the adventures you've been on, we can all relate to our own relative level. It's interesting how you described the type of person you were in that. And I think this is pretty common, that we're protecting ourselves really from pain. We're fearful of pain. We're uncomfortable in pain. We don't like emotion. We don't like sadness. We don't like, and then what that results in is just no emotion. Right. There's no joy, but there's also none of what we were protecting ourselves from. But there's also no joy.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that you didn't go, and this was my experience, because I had a very similar journey, but mine led to addiction, and heavy addiction, alcohol, drugs, all the stuff. And that's how I masked the pain, and eventually big breakthrough, for whatever reasons. But that release is, that's it. It was just building and building and building and building. And then, you're either going to put a bullet in your head or you're going to cry.
Yeah.
And thank God you cried, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. And me too. Oh, wow. That's awesome. All right. So then you're letting it out, and now you need to find a new life, essentially. And it's right there in front of you. You probably feel this huge sense of relief. When you have that let go, what did that feel like afterwards?
That's a good point. It is, and it's a great question, is that there was a big sense of relief initially. And that was the first time, because we've talked about surrender several times. That was the first time I ever gained strength in surrender. But at the time, I didn't understand what I'd done. I didn't understand why it worked. I didn't understand why it was powerful. I didn't understand any of that stuff. I just knew I'd experienced it and I felt better. But I think at that stage is kind of when I found the path and I started to get on the path. But a lot of people, I think when we talk about it, they automatically assume once you're quote unquote on the path, then it's just rainbows and Care Bears and gumdrops
right.
and every day I wake up and little bluebirds just do all this kind
now
of stuff.
You feel the pain you've been hiding for so many years.
And I'm telling you, man, is once I kind of got on that path, it took several years, literally years for me to figure out, a way to put this organization in place. Then how can we try to, have such a positive impact on people by, putting on these big global expeditions. So, I mean, this took years and years of work. And, in order to get that done, I mean, I pulled back from friends and family and, I mean, my life flipped 180 degrees and I went into the cave and just became like a mad scientist trying to put all this stuff together. And then once I kind of put it all together, then the training began for everything I was going to do. And that was literally thousands of hours of training alone in the mountains, in the gym, on the road, this and that, to kind of do all this stuff. And that was going through multiple surgeries, multiple surgical procedures, multiple, breaks and tears and like all this stuff. And that was just to get to the starting line, of this thing. So I think that's important to understand, for people is that once you kind of find, your path, whatever that is, it's difficult to stay on that thing. And it's difficult to find it and it's difficult to stay on it.
Yeah.
And that there are ebbs and flows. And, and also and we can, get into this, it's included in the book, is that in late 2021, 2022, is that, the project, we'd been successful in every expedition that I had a chance to go on. But then the North Pole got canceled because of Russia, Ukraine. Mm-hmm. A flight that we were planning around the world, that got canceled. Another part of the project got canceled. And I mean, I went from just being, 10 for 10 expeditions, just kicking butt and taking names to all of a sudden 3 weeks later, a month later, I mean, we've just lost everything we've worked for.
Yeah.
And I mean, and I've just personally spiraled into a dark, dark place. And honestly, that place that I went to may have been lower than the place where I started. And the reason being is that to your question, or to what you mentioned earlier, is I thought I had arrived. I thought I was on the path. I found the light. I found the direction. I'm moving. I'll never feel that pain again. But then to have that path feel like you've lost it again, I'm like, I had it. Now I've lost it. Now I'm really, in the outhouse, for lack of a better term. Mm-hmm. And I got into a very, very dark place, even during all this kind of stuff. And it took that, reigniting that understanding of strength and surrender and kind of reapplying these things to kind of find my way back through on it. But it's a long-winded way of me saying is that it's just important to understand that it takes a lot of work, even when you know the direction and the application that you're looking for, because it's not going to be this linear progression of up and to the right.
Yeah.
It's going to be ebbs and flows on it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the simple way of putting it is that's life, right? Yeah. And now you're living life. You're going to have terrible times. And I obviously always relate back to kind of the addiction experience, and there's sobriety, and then there's relapses, and then there's you come out of sobriety and you're on that pink cloud, they call it, and then you get smacked in the face by something that's out of your control and it takes you back down, and you're like, wait a minute, I thought I was out.
Right, exactly.
I didn't know this was supposed to happen. But to your point is once you kind of work that muscle and continue your practices and understand that life is hard and life is going to suck, and you're going to get dark and you're going to get high and you're going to get low, and all those things are normal and natural.
Right.
That's what I always have to remember when things get shitty.
Yeah.
Is this is what it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
It's
a challenge, and I think it gets oversimplified and overused these days, simplified and overused. But when you talk about, the Four Noble Truths, of Buddha, and the first is that life is suffering. And obviously he means it a little bit differently than traditional connotation of suffering, but just that life is difficult. And once we start to, truly embrace the difficulties with appreciation, just like we appreciate the perceived victories, I think that's a big turning point. Because literally every single night before I go to bed, the last thing I do is I read a list of 4 questions, and I see if I can answer these how I answer these questions depending on how I live my day. And then I take 5 or 10 minutes and just sit in appreciation and just say I'm thankful for this and this. And it's not just listing everything off, but it's just feeling that level of appreciation.
Gratitude, yeah.
And the challenge is to say I'm appreciative of the difficulties that I'm facing right now, and to actually mean that. And that's been a big challenge for me to work on, but it's something that I try to work on every day, because these difficulties and challenges that's what really makes us who we are.
Yeah.
And that's when we look back. That's what you look back on, is when you overcome these things, not just if somebody walked up and handed you a check for $1 million, but you earning that money is going to mean so much more to you.
Yeah. Do you think, and I ask this just out of personal curiosity, do the hard times, the emotional and mental hard times, for what brought on for whatever reason, it could be the loss of a mother, it could be, for God's, anything. I have found in my life that as I'm older, I'm reaching 50, that not that they get easier, but I get kind of used to them. They're not they don't take me to the place that they used to.
Yeah. Now, I think that's a good point, and I think that's a good thing, because it shows, growth and development. One of the challenges I think a lot of people have, and one of the challenges that I have, is we want to get worked up over something. Because by nature, it's like, if you and I are out, in a cave somewhere, I need to be, but we need to be on guard for, saber-toothed tiger, or, a wolf coming in. Exactly. Yeah, it's like we want to look and see something and fix it and attack it and this and that. So I think that's one of the challenges, is not to get addicted to that need to get worked up over something, but to rather sit there and to see it and acknowledge it and understand that this is not a wolf coming in to kill you just because you're going to have a late payment on a credit card or something.
Right.
And I can get worked up over stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
So it's keeping that perspective, that perspective in mind. Yeah.
So when you put together the program, the project, you had it mapped out. So all these things that you've done, the 7 tallest peaks, the crossing the Atlantic, the skiing to the South Pole, and there was one other, the Mojave Desert. Those were all mapped out.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then you had flying around the Earth and skiing to the North Pole.
Right.
And is that all of them?
That's that's all of them for this.
So you
project.
did all but 2.
Yeah. So I was able to get it's the way it originally worked is we had everything scheduled to be accomplished in a single year.
Oh, got it.
Yeah.
So there was a time
exact.
frame on
So there was
it.
a time, and this was just a purely artificial time frame. But it's my good friend Jay Jablonski and I, who started the organization with me. He and I just kind of came up with that. So everything was just meticulously scheduled. I'm back on this day. I'm gone on this day. Back on all that kind of stuff.
God,
so within those 12 months, I was able to climb the highest peak on every continent. As you mentioned, ski the South Pole, row the Atlantic Ocean, and then trek. Became the first person to go solo unsupported across the Mojave Desert and Death Valley. And then we were on pace to be able to do the North Pole, which would have meant I'd have been the 5th person to ever complete the Grand Slam, what's called the Explorers Grand Slam, in a single year, and then to fly a plane around the world. So we were perfectly on track for it. But talking about these things outside of our control, is that the North Pole, when I was rowing across the Atlantic, out in the middle of the Atlantic, I got word that Russia goes into Ukraine and we've lost the pole. And that was, I think, the 4th year in a row that the pole's been canceled. And obviously the people in Ukraine were facing a much more dire situation, than I was. So I've certainly had that in mind. But I'd put in so much time and effort for this, and to say, you've lost this, and it has nothing to do with what you've done or what you can do, but you've lost this thing that you've worked so hard for, was very difficult. And then the flight around the world, obviously, got delayed because of Russia, Ukraine, and because the fuel prices and all the logistical costs literally went up like 5-fold. So we decided to spend that money elsewhere. And then the last thing was, since that time, is I did a longer crossing of the Mojave. So the original was 213 miles, and I went back and I did about 329 and a half miles, solo unsupported. And that's kind of a freestanding record on its own for the fastest ever crossing of the Mojave on foot. And that was an ass kicker.
I think I saw the video of you at the end.
Yeah, I was pretty beat up after that one.
That was amazing. Golly. All right. So why? Let's go to why. So when you're sitting there and it's, I'm figuring out my purpose and I want to help people with their purpose, and then you go, oh, you called this the Explorers Grand Slam? Right. What is that?
Yeah. So and I apologize, because this stuff gets technical, and people who know about it, they get real pissy about all these definitions, and people who don't care about it. So it's you get stuck in two worlds. So the Explorers Grand Slam is climbing the highest peak on each continent, and then skiing to the North Pole and the South Pole.
That's the Grand Slam.
That's the Grand Slam. And so far, only 4 people have ever done it in a single year. So I was trying to be the 5th.
Damn.
On pace, lost it. But and then every year since then, North Pole's been canceled. Last year, I went to Russia and I sat in middle of Siberia for 2 weeks, and the pole got canceled again. So
Now, why would it get canceled?
Is because the North Pole is different from the South Pole. Is that there's no landmass at the North Pole. It's just floating sea ice.
Okay.
So, and you can only go for about 3, maybe 4 weeks every April out of the year, and that's it.
That's
because
the
of the condition.
window?
That's it. It's about 3 weeks.
Wow.
And you land on on a floating pack of ice, as the runway for the plane to get in there, and basically a crack developed in the runway that they couldn't repair. So after 2 weeks, we got the boot. So now I go back in this April, to try it. Yeah.
So will it still be considered completing the Grand Slam?
It will be the Grand Slam. It's
just not in the
exactly.
year.
Most people that do it do the. I think there's 2 ways to do the Grand Slam. Either the last degree, which is what I'm doing, where for the North and the South Poles, you ski from the 89th degree to the 90th. So you're skiing 69 statute miles.
Okay.
Or you can do a full length where you have to go more than 1 degree. Normally it's like 3 degrees, something like that. But I think in total right now, maybe I forget the last number. I think it's like 65 people have ever finished the Grand Slam, and most take 15, 20 years, things like that. I think mine will end up being like 4 years, 3.5 years, something like that.
Weak.
I'm telling you, it pisses me off, man.
I bet it does.
Yeah.
That's amazing. All right, well, let's go into the altruistic side of things, the foundation, and what all it's doing for people, and what your passion behind that is, I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, so it all started with Dawson's Peak Foundation. As I mentioned, it started out with a good friend of mine, Jay Jablonski, and our mission is to inspire the discovery and pursuit of individual purpose. And basically the way that we do that is we create large-scale global expeditions. We sponsor athletes. They go out, and undertake these expeditions where they're really pushing human potential and capabilities. Then viewers can watch them and draw parallels between themselves and the athletes and say, if this person's doing X, Y, and Z, then I can find something in my life, that's comparable, and I can, attack it and overcome it, or, surrender into it, or, kind of whatever it is, just to kind of serve as points of inspirations. And our current project, which is 7 for Soldiers, which is our first project, I'm obviously the athlete. And the exciting part is we've teamed up with 2 of the highest rated veteran charities in the country, Gary Sinise Foundation and Hope for the Warriors, where they're receiving 100% of the net proceeds, that we raise. So wow. I've been doing this since late 2018. I haven't made a dime on it. And, we've had a chance to donate $50,000, already, and hopefully can, raise a lot more money. But that's kind of, the organization and what we're doing. And, for me personally, a lot of people talk about the why. You hear about, like, what's your why, this and that. And I look at it a little bit differently. Is I look at, I say, what's your have? It's like, what do you have to get out of you? And it took me a long time. It took me, 40 years to figure out what I have to get out of me. And that is helping people to identify and live with a sense of purpose, and to apply that purpose not only for themselves, but for others, and transition from that point of being self-centered to service-centered. Because I see such a positive impact that it had on my life, and I'm just trying to share that with others. And we talked about earlier is you talk about climbing Everest and rowing an ocean and this that. Before we started this project, I didn't know where the hell Everest was. I'm like, it's right. Over there. Number one, and number two, it sounds terrible. You're rowing an ocean. I was like, climbing mountains sounds like a horrible idea. It's dumb. I don't want to do it. I don't want anybody to hear about it. And it's just getting people to understand that all the stuff I'm doing is just to facilitate a deeper conversation of potential and purpose and capability and service and things like that. That's really what it is. Okay. So I don't expect anyone to go out and to climb this or row that or carry a pack across this desert or whatever, but we can all do these relative things in our lives. And I see the positive impact it's had on mine, and hopefully can do the same for others. Mm-hmm.
There's got to be something in you that is pushing you to do such extreme measures.
There's something that's still inside of me that's fighting to get out, and I'm trying to figure out, just to be very honest with you, exactly what that is in its entirety. Yeah. I just know that I'm on the right path, and I know there's more, and I know the only way to kind of figure that out is to continue to push. And like we talked about pushing past those perceived limits, and just literally on a daily basis is just pushing and pushing, and then I think as you do that, it starts to kind of open up and expand, and you kind of get a better sense of what you're looking at and what you're looking for. but it's still a journey. I'm literally, I feel like I'm just getting started. Unfortunately, I'm pretty old for an adventure athlete. I'm 45. That's not when you get started doing this stuff.
Right.
It's a young man's game, and yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know.
But it's just working to see what that is. And honestly, is when I have a chance to meet guys like yourself or speak with people and see the positive impact that we're having on others. Mm-hmm. We get emails all the time and DMs on Instagram, this and that, where people are like, "Hey, this is helping me," or "Do this" or "Do that." I mean, that's what it's all about.
Yeah,
it really is. That's what motivates me to get off the couch. A lot of times when I don't feel like it, or like when something's hurting, I'm like, if I'm gonna come in and talk to you, I can't BS some workout and then come in here and give you a load of jargon that just it's not authentic.
Have you always had that in you? The call it discipline?
Yeah, I think that I have. Is I enjoy kind of a regimented, disciplined, approach. But that being said, is I've got two sides of me. Is I've got that kind of very creative and just on a whim, I might just leave for a month or 2 months and just go be alone in the mountains or whatever. But outside of that I'm just kind of by nature, I enjoy a sense of scheduling and discipline and things like that. But the challenge is a lot of my self-worth when I was growing up was tied to accomplishment. That if I wasn't accomplishing things, then I didn't matter and I didn't have value. And I think a lot of people can relate to that as well. So
now we're talking.
Yeah. So I'm trying to kind of work that to do this stuff in a positive way.
Yeah.
And not by seeking love, primarily self-love, but by demonstrating self-love. Mm-hmm. And those are two very different ways of coming at the same thing.
Yeah.
And my entire life, it was always about earning love.
Yeah.
And now it's about demonstrating love.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, and in demonstration, you earn.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's the right way to earn.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wow, man. All right. Yeah. Well, I think this is such an interesting part of talking to someone like you is trying to understand, most people would look at you or a Laird Ham or, any of these people and say, they're just built different. They've got different wiring. And I think there is some truth to that, but I also think that anybody can do it to a degree that serves them.
Yeah. There's no question that there is some different wiring. But I mean, I think that when I watch somebody play guitar,
sure,
I'm like,
sure, could never.
Yeah. I mean, I fiddle around and things, but this is embarrassing. Yeah. Or I see, someone create a piece of art, or I watch like a documentary or something. I'm just like that. It just is blowing my mind. So we all are, wired differently. There's no question. But it's about kind of expressing who you are and finding the way that you want to do it. So for me, it's all these physical activities because I enjoy being physical. I enjoy being in that pain. I enjoy the challenge of it. I enjoy putting weight on my back. I enjoy being alone in the mountains. I like it. And I've always enjoyed being very physical. But other people may do it in a different way. Yeah. I mean, it could be, working for an organization, working with the Boys and Girls Club. It could be,
parenting 4 kids.
Exactly. Like there's different ways to express this stuff. And I think that's part of the, we keep coming back to it, but that's part of the conversation is there's no one set way to do this stuff.
Yeah.
But honestly, it's all the same stuff, that we're talking about. Right. It's about connection. It's about demonstrating love rather than trying to earn love. Mm-hmm. It's about shifting from self-centered to self-centered to service-centered. Mm-hmm. About living with purpose, about, overcoming obstacles. It's about all this kind of stuff. And, until we start doing that, I'm telling you, to just kind of sit back and let life happen on you, it's easier. But at the end, there's going to be a lot more pain associated with that ease.
Yeah.
And it's much more difficult to get up off the couch and do all this stuff every day. But when it's all said and done, you feel so much better and you're in a better position. So it's like you're going to hurt one way or the other.
Right.
You just need to pick which pain you're going to have.
Yeah.
And it's better for you to initiate that pain yourself and to take control over it rather than to sit back and let it act upon you.
Yes. Well said. Very well said. Yeah, Laird would call it like controlled suffering, mm-hmm. or what Goggins calls it intentional suffering. You ever met Goggins?
Yeah, what's funny is I met him once. I was coming back, I haven't thought about the story in years. I was coming back from UCLA. I just had shoulder surgery, and he was running down Sunset in Bel Air. And I mean, I've got my arm all bandaged up. I've still got iodine and everything. I'm literally on the way home from surgery.
Literally.
Yeah, literally. And then he comes running by. I was like, turn the car around. I was like, there's no way that's David Goggins.
Stay hard.
Yeah. So I have the guy pull over. I run up and I had the hat on for the charity. And I was like, I'm sorry to bother. He just finished his run. I was like, I'm sorry to bother you. This, that. I was like, I introduced myself. I gave him my hat. So I was like,
wow.
I was like, I'd love to work with you. It was something like that.
Yeah.
And obviously, I never heard from him, and I get it, and whatever. But that's my Goggins experience. Was,
Damn.
coming home bandaged up.
Well, he needs to know of you now.
Yeah.
I think you might have surpassed some of his stuff.
Yeah.
But that's cool.
And I'm sorry to jump in, but you talk about suffering.
Yeah.
And you hear that terminology, or you hear that term so often these days, or embrace the suck. And I think that's another important thing that's just as important as the appreciation we're talking about is perspective. I mean, like I can tell you, I'm in pain, physical pain a lot, during the week, but it doesn't suck in my mind, and it's not suffering.
Yeah.
Like suck and suffering, it's about the more we do, the greater perspective that we can have. And whether you're doing breath holds or whether you're climbing mountains or whatever, that perspective allows you to kind of step back and get a better understanding of everything in your environment. Then you can apply different things in different ways from it. Where it's in my mind, suck and suffering is you get a phone call and someone just unexpectedly passed away,
right?
Or you get a phone call and it's a terminal illness, or you get a phone something like that. And that's where that's suck and suffering in my mind. It's not putting on a 100-pound pack and going on a Stairmaster for 2 hours.
Yeah.
Like that's candy ass.
That's training.
Exactly. I'm there because I'm doing it because it's difficult and I want to do something difficult.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to keep that perspective in mind, because far too often it's embrace the suck and push through the suffering and this and that. And I understand all that, and there's a time and place for it, but just to have that greater sense of perspective and understand what really is suffering, like being in a concentration camp in World War II with Viktor Frankl, and whatever, that versus, doing this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Big difference.
Pretty big difference. Yeah. You don't, you don't go play, 4 quarters of a game and get hurt and injured and have a victory and come home and say that sucked.
Yeah.
Or that was suffering. That's not what I hear it.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense too. All right. God, there was another question, or just one little thing I wanted to touch on, and it's, I talk a lot about this kind of stuff, and a lot of it inevitably is situated in kind of mid to second half of life mentality. And a lot of that was for me. I mean, even though I entered recovery and quit drinking at, 29 years old, I'm 47 now, so it's been 19 years of no alcohol. I didn't grasp a lot until pretty recently. Mm-hmm. There's a reason they call it a midlife crisis, and I don't love that term, but it essentially just means that time in life where you really start to assess.
Right.
And you really start to understand that you're not invincible.
Maybe a midlife revelation or
revelation,
something.
sure.
Yeah.
Just any of that. And it can happen in lots of different, some people it's 35, some people it's 45. I mean, it could be any of those. But there is something that happens. And I think it is that inevitability of death, of conclusion of life.
Yeah.
And so what are we here for? What is our purpose? Those things become very real and very intense and for some people at least. And I love talking to people about that.
Look, I think you said that very well. It's and everybody is different. When I hit 20, I never thought I would hit 20. There was just something inside of me that felt like there was always this clock ticking and I'd never get there. Then when I hit 30, I was shocked. I'm like, there's no way I'm supposed to be here at 30. Then I hit 40 and I'm just like, what the hell? I'm like, I've been watching this clock. I'm like, this sand
what is
dial,
going on here?
Yeah, like this hourglass has been out of sand for 20 years now. Like somebody forgot because I'm not supposed to be here.
Why did you think like that?
For some reason, I've always had that thing inside of me. I just kind of thought it was going to be just a in and out kind of thing.
Wow.
And I don't mean that in a morbid way, but I just always felt this kind of just timer going for some reason. And then it kind of got to that point where I'm like, well, I guess maybe I'm going to be here for a while. And
Oh, well.
yeah. And I was like, and I'm tired of being in pain. I'm tired of being disconnected. I'm tired of feeling lost and broken. I'm tired of going through life saying I'm a bad person that's going to screw something up and I don't deserve to be loved. And I dealt with that shit for 40 years and nobody knew it. And I'm like, well, I guess if I'm going to be here, it's kind of like you move into a house for 40 years. Everything's still, all the boxes are still there. I'm like, well, I guess I'm going to be here for a while.
You guys got to unpack.
I might as well unpack. It's like, I got to that point, I was like, I'm tired of this. And I was like, I might as well unpack my life and start to build the life that I want to live. And again, not only for myself, but for others. And that was the big kind of turning point, is when I got out of my head and I started living for a different purpose, and specifically is being of service. And that's the thing, is when we're in these different stages or points of pain, is that we get caught up in our own internal struggles, and it's this loop in our heads, and we just internalize everything. And the best way to get over yourself is to get outside of yourself. And the best way to do that is to learn, how can I be of service? How can I make my life about more than myself? And that was, the turning point, the biggest turning point that I saw in my life.
Wow. There's a guy that I'm buddies with in Charlotte who he's heavy in the recovery space, and we'll talk about early sobriety and kind of how to get through those moments, those minute by minute moments in early sobriety. And he would always tell you to go outside and start picking up trash. And just exactly what you're talking. Just go be of service.
Be of service, man.
The easiest thing to do is just walk outside and just start picking shit up and throwing it away.
It is, and I tell you, I feel better. And look, there are times, it's funny you mention that, because when I say do different runs around here, like through the bird streets or up in hills or whatever, there's trash everywhere. And I'll stop in the middle of runs and I'll pick up trash and I'll pick up this, and I'm like, what? I've turned into a damn garbage man. But I feel better. I feel more connected. And even if I'm, say, training locally, say over in Runyon Canyon, there are a couple rural side trails I use over there. But I'll go through there, and maybe somebody's coming down, I'm going to pass them, and I might not be in a good mood, or I'm like, I want to focus on my training and this and that, and then I may pass them and not say something, and I don't feel good. But those moments where I'm like, you know what, your life's not just about you. Maybe you're going to be the only person that talks to this person today. Maybe no one's looked at them in 3 months or said a word to them in a year. Maybe something just happened in their life and they're in a terrible place. And when I stop and I'm like, get outside of yourself. Quit acting like you're such a big deal, like you're just lost on yourself. And I'll just say good morning to somebody, or I'll say hello to them. And I'm telling you, in that instant, every single time I feel better. Where it's like your life's not just about you, and because you never know the impact you're going to have on somebody. I can't tell you how many times I've been in maybe a bad place or an off mood, and someone has said hello to me, or said good morning to me, or opened a door for me, and I'm like, whoa. I'm like, I feel better. I'm like, I appreciate that they took the time to do something for me.
Yeah.
And it's about, reciprocating that.
Yeah. Well, and often there are, and I do this myself, but there are times where I'm in a mental state where if I walk by someone and they don't say something, I'm like, that fucking asshole.
Yeah.
And it it's almost like I'm testing them. Or if I let somebody in a car and they don't say thank you, I get
welcome.
mad. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So there's something there where when they do the thing that I hope they do, it does make me feel better. Therefore, why don't I do that to others every time? And
it's also maintaining that that perspective we were talking about earlier. Is you never know, and this is kind of an off tangent, but this just made me think of it. I thought you had a good point. Is you never know what place the other person's in.
Oh no.
When my mom passed away, I got a text message, and it said, "Your mom is gone." That's how I found out that she had passed. And I was sitting on an airplane. I just landed in St. Louis on my way to 3 days of business meetings. And I'm sitting there on the airplane, just landed. I look, your mom's gone. And I'm looking around the plane, and people are laughing and joking and playing on their phones and high-fiving and all this. I'm like, my mom just died, and you people don't care.
Right.
I'm like, the world was supposed to stop. Did y'all not check your text messages? And I'm just kind of thinking about it. And like the woman next to me had no idea. The person across from me had no idea.
Of course
and
not.
And I went into this is just kind of how I'm wired. Is I went in, I did my 3 days of meetings. I didn't say a word to anybody about it. And I just got on with the business at hand, because that's what I do. Mm-hmm. And ever since that time, that had a big impact on me. And it just made me understand you never know what the person next to you is going through. And far too often when we see a person in a situation, like someone, gets in and doesn't say thank you, they could have just gotten a phone call that somebody in their life, has terminal cancer.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Or just got a phone call that their kid broke the leg and now they're trying to get to the hospital. It's like we make all these, because of the way our brains work, if we make all these assumptions until there's just one puzzle piece left, like, oh, but I know all the other things, so now this guy just cut me off because he's a prick.
Mm-hmm.
I sit back now, I'm like, don't act like you know everything because you don't know everything.
Yeah.
And that just kind of helped change my perspective on that.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right. Let's talk about your book real quick.
Yeah.
We got. I'm getting the lucky first look over here, hot off the press.
I'm supposed to. Yeah. That's it. Strength and Surrender.
Look at that thing.
Proof copy.
Incredible. Well, give me a little bit about the title. I mean, we've covered a lot of that, but let's talk a little bit about surrender and the mission of the book.
Yeah. Certainly it ties in what we were talking about. It's a memoir of my entire life. So
your whole life, huh?
Everything. I'm telling you is I've been more open and honest. Is I've shared things in here I've never shared at any point with anybody.
Nice.
So I'm trying to be as open and honest and raw, as vulnerable as possible, because and to show people that we all have a story, we all have a journey. Don't be embarrassed about this or that. It's just we're all jacked up, in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to be, again, as honest as I can possibly be on it. But it talks about, the evolution from, childhood, facing those decades of debilitating depression, being a chameleon, being able to hide everything, not express anything to anybody. And in that turning point in my life, where I felt like I was, I kind of found that path. And then the starting of the organization, 7 for Soldiers, setting all the records, all that kind of stuff. So if you're into mountain climbing and ocean rowing and desert traverses and all that information's in there. About how high it was and how hot it was, how heavy the pack was, and all that's in there. If you couldn't care less about it, there's a story about evolution and development and finding purpose and overcoming tragedy and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
My personal journals from the expeditions are in there.
Wow.
These are like raw, firsthand. I never thought they'd be published. I never wrote them to be published, but I decided to put that in there. Daily, kind of like small lessons that I learned along the way that I use, on a daily basis. And then finally, things that I call meditations, which are like the main pillars that I use in my life, the 13, 14, the biggest things that I use on a daily basis to kind of, guide what I'm doing. And then lastly, there's some one-off custom art that I had commissioned, for the book. Because I'm really I didn't want to just have a book, because there's a million, books out there in the space. Is I wanted to create an emotional experience for the reader where the artwork is supposed to hit you in a certain emotional way to put you in a certain space, mental space, physical, emotional space, to where you receive the story, hopefully, in a more poignant and connected way.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Awesome, man.
So it's been a lot of work, and I'm excited. January 7th, it's going to the paperback, audio, and ebook are coming out.
You do the audio?
I'm just about to start recording that next week. Yeah.
Have fun in that booth.
Maybe I'll just hire you next time you come out.
Yeah. Happy to. Dawson, awesome, dude.
Hey, man, I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Of course. Thank you for coming on, man. Thank you for sharing all of that. Golly, to say you're an inspiration is an understatement, and I know you're modest and you just want to keep it there, but you've done some incredible things, and I'm excited to keep watching, man.
Now, listen,
thank you.
Thank you for having me. Honestly, as I really have looked forward to this. I think you do a heck of a job. So I appreciate taking the time to have me on. But again, and I'm not trying to be modest here. Is I've had a chance to do some cool things, but it's we all have this stuff inside of us. It's just accepting that we do and allowing ourselves to experience it, and to pull it out of us.
Yeah. Cool.
Yep.
All right.
Thank you, man.
Yep.